Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. I was expecting this to happen sooner or later, and it appears to have happened already. The United States may try to block the International Court from issuing arrest warrants to Israeli officials, including Benjamin Netanyahu. So I will go ahead and put on my spectacles and read to you the article, and then we can talk about it afterwards. The headline is, U.S. pressure could derail ICC arrest warrants for Israeli leaders. The subhead is, court faces pressure after chief prosecutor announces he is seeking to arrest Israeli leaders for actions in Gaza. Just a brief comment there. Neither the U.S. nor Israel are members of the ICC, of the World Court, whatever you want to call it. And so I don't understand how the United States would have that kind of sway. But given that the U.S. is the most powerful country in the world, with the most powerful military in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, I guess that might explain it. But that is certainly what it appears the U.S. is trying to do. So I will go ahead and continue. The author is Matt Nasheed, and it is dated May 24th, 2024. That is today. When Israel started relentlessly bombing Gaza, Rasha Abdul Shahan packed a handful of belongings and fled south with her parents and siblings. Her brother stayed behind out of fears that he would never be able to come home again. Abu Shaban was in a displacement camp in Rafah when she learned that an Israeli missile had struck her home. My brother was killed at the beginning of November. He was there when another family was displaced in our house. Abu Shaban, 38 years old, told Al Jazeera. We heard from our neighbors that an ambulance was prevented from reaching them. Again, no surprise there either. Abu Shaban is one of tens of thousands of Palestinians hungry for justice after losing loved ones, property, and livelihoods to Israel's devastating war in Gaza, which began after a Hamas-led attack on Israeli communities and military outposts on October 7th of last year. About 1,139 Israelis were killed in that attack, and 250 were taken captive. Since then, Israel has killed more than 35,500 Palestinians in a campaign of violence that UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese and other legal experts have described as a genocide. On May 20th, after months of gathering evidence, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, Karim Khan, announced that he was seeking arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as for Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, the head of the movement's political bureau, Ismail Haniyeh, and the head of its military wing, Mohammed Deif. Netanyahu and Gallant are accused of using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, which is a war crime, in case you didn't know that. extermination, willfully causing great suffering, and deliberately directing attacks against civilians. The Hamas leaders are accused of extermination, taking hostages, and torture. Khan's announcement marks the first time an ICC chief prosecutor has sought to prosecute senior officials from a close ally of the United States, marking a significant moment in the body's history. While Khan's announcement gives Abu Shaban hopes that Palestinians may obtain justice someday, she fears that Israel and the U.S. will pressure ICC judges to reject Khan's requests. I have mixed feelings, she said. I really worry that the U.S. and Israel will stop the issuing of the arrest warrants from happening. Weeks before Khan's announcement, senior Republican lawmakers in the U.S. submitted a letter to his office that threatened to bar him and his family from the country if he applied for warrants against Israeli leaders. So sweet, so nice, really, really playing fair, really playing fair. Back to the article. We don't view it like that, Khan said. This court is the legacy of Nuremberg, and this court is a sad indictment of humanity. And this court should be the triumph of law over power and brute force. U.S. President Joe Biden criticized Khan's decision by calling the application for indictments against Israeli leaders, quote unquote, outrageous. Biden, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and several U.S. lawmakers said Khan had drawn a false moral equivalence between Hamas terrorists and democratically elected Israeli leaders. Netanyahu, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have all made similar statements. No surprise there. But Adil Haq, a legal scholar at Rutgers University in New Jersey, said those arguments have no legal weight. Israel's allies are using a rhetorical device to undermine Khan's equal application of international law, he explained. Basically, the prosecutor is saying that officials in the Israeli government have violated international law, and that Hamas leaders have violated international law, and that those violations are serious, Haq told Al Jazeera. People can discuss if charges on Hamas leaders are better or worse than the ones brought against Israeli leaders, but that's not the prosecutor's concern. 3 judges from the ICC's pre-trial chamber are now deliberating over whether to issue the arrest warrants. In a statement, Human Rights Watch urged all members of the ICC to guard the court's independence against hostile pressure that is likely to increase while the ICC judges consider Khan's request. 3 years ago, the Biden administration lifted sanctions that former President Donald Trump imposed on former ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda and other officials. Trump was angry that Bensouda had opened up investigations into Israeli abuses in the Palestinian occupied territory and abuses committed by U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Mark Kirstein, a legal scholar at the University of Fraser Valley in Vancouver, believes the U.S. may also try putting direct pressure on Palestinian officials. I think a possible goal of the U.S. would be to get the Palestinian Authority, the PA, to stop cooperating with the ICC by getting it to stop sending evidence, he said. Heidi Matthews, a legal scholar at York University in Toronto, added that the U.S. also has a history of pressuring its U.S. Western allies into betraying their commitments to the Rome Statute. From a foreign policy perspective, Khan's decision will put longtime supporters of the court, who are also allies of Israel, in a position where they have to choose between continued support for the project of international criminal law and justice, or to diplomatically shield Israel, she told Al Jazeera. Local human rights groups welcomed Khan's move as a first step in pursuing justice for Palestinians in Gaza, including those who were killed long before October 7th. A source from the Gaza-based Al-Mazan Center for Human Rights, who requested anonymity for fear of reprisals from Israel, referenced Israel's killing of 1,462 Palestinian civilians in 51 days in its 2014 war on Gaza. An independent UN inquiry found credible allegations of war crimes committed by Israel and Palestinian armed groups in that war. 4 years later, Israeli troops also shot and killed unarmed Palestinian protesters in Gaza who assembled along the fence with Israel as part of the Great March of Return protests. We believe that ICC arrest warrants can have a deterrent effect, the source from Al-Mazan Center told Al Jazeera. Abu Shaban, who is now in Qatar, added that the perceptible change in global public opinion from Israel indicates that justice is within reach, despite pressure from the U.S. and from Israel. The move by the ICC to seek warrants itself means that there are more people seeking to hold Israel accountable for the atrocities that they do. If those efforts continue, they eventually will lead to something, she told Al Jazeera. In addition, Abu Shaban said she deserves justice for her brother and for the distress Israel's occupation and siege on Gaza has caused so many Palestinians. I was raised under intifadas. The term intifada, by the way, is the Arabic term for uprising, invasions, communication blackouts, and humiliation at Israeli-controlled crossings, she said. I lost somebody in my family, and I lost my life. I lived my whole life under Israel's occupation. And that is the end of the article. How sad. It is hard really to know what to say after reading something like that. I am still endeavoring to avoid attacking another country, and I will abide by that. But I will leave it to your imagination. I will leave it to your imagination because I don't think it is difficult to imagine what I would say, or what anybody would say, what any communist would say, especially what any Maoist third worldist would say at this particular situation. Gaza is a third world and fourth world, meaning a developing and an indigenous region of the world. Israel is not indigenous at all to that area. Not at all. Despite occasional, I think that's the best word, Israeli claims to the contrary, and it certainly is not third world either. Israel, like most countries in Greater West Asia, is a part of the fourth world, the indigenous world, or indigeneity. And so when you look at Gaza, when you look at the West Bank for that matter, which make up Palestine, the Palestinian territories, and you compare their living conditions, their horrendous living conditions, with those of people in Israel and those of people in the United States, and you ask, why? Why? Is Israel, why is the United States trying to stop arrest warrants for being issued against Bibi Netanyahu and other Israeli officials? That is really a question which does not require an answer. Again, the United States has been the primary protector of Israel since its inception. Maybe second to the US would be Germany. Now, with Germany, I can understand it to an extent. I think anybody with any level of compassion can understand it. Germans understandably feel guilty for the Holocaust perpetrated by Adolf Hitler. And so they have been friends with Israel since the beginning of Israel. But at this time, when we see entire communities, entire families being wiped out in a genocide, in the Holocaust of the 21st century, I don't think that compassion has any place. Compassion based on the past has any place, I should say. Compassion should have a place based on what is happening right now, meaning we can't go back in history and bring back those people who were killed in the German Holocaust. We can't. I wish we could. I wish we could return to the past and prevent Hitler from ever being elected. I wish that the US would have been aware of who Hitler was from the beginning, which the US was not, and therefore did nothing to oppose Hitler and his regime. And for that matter, the rest of the world was not aware of it. It was a massive surprise to the world seeing those rotting dead bodies in ovens, which were published in newspapers all over the world, and which understandably resulted in compassion at that time. But I am an old man at 68, and the Holocaust of the 20th century occurred a long time ago, about 10 years before I was born. That is a long time. That is a really long time. We can't go back and change the past. We cannot. But we can change the present. And we can change our collective futures. We can make an attempt to make sure that there is justice in this world. whether for Palestinians, whether for Haitians, or for any third world or fourth world people anywhere in the globe. And sadly, that justice is very hard to come by. In most cases, it is nowhere to be found. And so, yeah, compassion is good. It is good that Germany feels compassion and regret over what it did a long time ago. But again, that was a long time ago. What we need to focus on are the people who are suffering in Gaza right now in 2024. And to ask the question, while we cannot change the past, we cannot bring back the lives of those Jews, of those gypsies, of those Jehovah's Witnesses, and of those Roman Catholics that were killed under the regime of Adolf Hitler. We can prevent additional people from being slaughtered. And sadly, that slaughter is continuing to this day. And so I guess that is my hope. I guess it is. At a time when it seems that the US and Israel may try to pressure the ICC not to bring charges against Israeli officials. I guess that means that they have no conscience themselves. They have no moral compass. They have no heart. They have no empathy, and they have no intersubjectivity. And that is what is needed at this hour. So we cannot change what has already happened. We can have as many regrets as we want. I certainly have plenty of my own for what happened in Germany, although I don't have any immediate relatives that were killed in the Holocaust, since my ancestors migrated to the US at the turn of the 20th century. I'm sure I have distant relatives who were in Germany or other countries that were affected by the Third Reich, but nobody that I know of. So I have nobody to mourn for. I am sure that's not true with everyone, but I have no one to mourn for in my family. But I mourn for the Gazans every single day, without exception. There is not a day that goes by when I do not mourn for the Gazans. And if people in the US in particular, Israel is a different story, because Israel has a lot to lose, especially if leaders of their government are prosecuted by the ICC. But that's not going to happen to the US. There are no US officials being targeted by the ICC, by the International Criminal Court, the World Court. So I would hope that the leaders of the US would have a heart for the Gazans, because the Gazans are just like you and I. They're human beings. They have families. They have homes. At least some of them have homes. They have relationships with friends, just like you and I have relationships with friends. And they deserve justice, some kind of justice, for what has happened to them over the last several months. But it appears that both the US and Israel are bound and determined to prevent the Gazans from gaining that justice. And sadly, that would not be a surprise, given the track record of the U.S. in caring for oppressed peoples. We have no track record in this country, in my country, of caring for oppressed peoples, including Americans. How much less for people who are not Americans, people in Gaza, who are being slaughtered as I speak and have nowhere to go. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.